What is up? Good morning and welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot. And before we get into the show, I just want to take a second and thank each and every one of you. I have been yelling at you for weeks now to hit that subscribe button, and Club Fantasy has finally hit 1,000 subscribers. We literally could not have done this without you. We appreciate our viewers. Mock It Like It's Hot has taken off like crazy this year. We have our first ever video with 5,000 views. And we truly, truly do appreciate it. We do this because we love it. We do not get paid for this. I don't know how YouTube works now that we have 1,000 subscribers. Maybe we get ad revenue now. If you got an ad, comment below and let us know you got an ad. We'd love to hear about it. So like, subscribe, do all that great stuff. But we just want to let you guys know we appreciate you. Today we are doing our first and maybe only best ball mock draft. I've kind of determined that people would rather do a real best ball draft than a mock draft, and that just doesn't fit my show motif. But there's no way I wasn't going to let Austin talk about best ball at least one time. So that's what we're doing today. Let's get into it. Good morning and welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot, Club Fantasy's weekly mock draft show. I am your host, Ryan Weisse. With me, as always, Austin Amandolia. And Austin, not only are you my co-host like you always are, you are my guest today as well, because you are my best ball resource. So why wouldn't I make you everyone else's best ball resource? How are you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing great. It feels different when you get to wake up to do a best ball draft. I love doing these so much. I love talking about it. It just really energizes me, which you may not ever be able to tell that I can get energized because, I kind of stay here all the time. Just ride that like 6 to 7 range. But best ball, it gets me going.
I remember we did a DFS show, me, you, and Kelly, who host our DFS show. And I made that same comment that it's so weird for me to be the host with you and Kelly, who both live in that 6 to 7 range. But I know when you guys are excited, but you still don't get out of the 6 to 7 range. Whereas me, for no reason at all, I'll just jump to 10 because that's just who I am as a person. And so it's a good dynamic for the show. But we're glad to have you here and jazzed up for best ball. And I mentioned it, earlier on. I want to thank Gator. A big part of our YouTube growth was Gator coming over, and he understands YouTube better than anybody at Club Fantasy, and he and Josh have worked together, Josh Hudson, our founder. And again, we appreciate the viewers. I know Gator would issue that same statement. You guys have just absolutely killed it this year. The mock draft shows have been nuts. Gator hosts our Monday mock draft show, and Gator and I demand a raise from our $0. Josh needs to start paying us $1 a show, and we'll throw Austin and Chris in there as well because we're carrying Club Fantasy right now. It's what it's all about. People care about the mock drafts, Austin.
Yeah, I'm saying people need the practice. It's that time of year.
And as I pointed out before, and let me go ahead and get the draft up on the screen. Practicing in best ball isn't always something that works well with a mock draft because it's a lot easier to go over to Underdog and pay $3 and jump into a mock draft. I noticed that last year when we started this show, and I had thought about pivoting, and now we have a best ball show. And Austin, you started a best ball show that I believe might be coming back again at some point this year. And the long and short is it doesn't fit well with this show's motif. So we're going to run one now so Austin can talk to you about the early best ball drafts. And then Austin, I'm relatively sure, is going to do another version of his enormous best ball article. So we'll do another one around that time so he can talk to you guys about that. While we're doing that, let's go ahead and start this draft. And as always, I like to break down the draft settings, and they're pretty easy to break down this time around. It is a half PPR mock draft in the style of Underdog Fantasy, where you can go and play a lot of their Best Ball Mania stuff. Just opened up the puppies and all their fun drafts. Just started up, half PPR, same settings, 30 seconds per pick, which is a very short time for Mock It Like It's Hot. So you're going to see auto picks. You're going to see crazy stuff go down. But again, we're not going to break down every single pick in this draft. Austin's going to recap his draft. He's going to talk about strategy. I'm going to make fun of what I think is the worst pick of the draft in the oops of the draft section. The goal here is to discuss interesting picks and trends as we see them happen. But I do like to, at least at the top of the show, mention who we have drafting with us. My buddy Kevin picking from the 1 spot, Jacob Lundy at 2, ELH at 3, Gator J, the legend at 4, Brocal, who's been doing a ton of drafts with us, as have Duarte. They're picking 5 and 6. Digorum, I'm going to say. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. I think you're a new drafter with us at 7. Thompson at 8. Gator Raiders, who has done every draft with us, at 9. Say Watt again, who invites me to mock drafts all the time. I try to jump in when I can, at 10. Austin, you took 11 this week, and Doombly is picking from the 12 spot. So those are our drafters. But Austin, my first section of my show sheet could not be simpler. It just says, "Let Austin wax poetic about best ball." So wax poetic about best ball. Why should people be interested? I know mock drafts aren't the best way to do it, but just talk about best ball in general.
Yeah. So first of all, just like best ball as a concept, if you're new to it, you don't have to set a lineup every week. It's the beautiful thing. It's different than the redraft settings where you have to stress about start sit every week. Best ball just automatically optimizes your lineup, and it's really taken off over the past, particularly 5 years, as underdog fantasy has made it huge. One of the most important things that you should do is go watch Summer School. First off, we have a ton of intro videos from last year. We're not going to redo those videos this year because that would be boring. You would just be coming back to get the same content that we did last year. We've got some new content coming this year and some new themes that we're going to organize our content around. I'm going to make a pick right now, and I'm going to pick a running back, which is kind of weird. But when you're looking at best ball, you need to know that there are tournaments and there are sit and go best ball leagues, and they have slightly different strategies, and they have very different payouts. So if you're playing on Underdog or DraftKings, that's something to pay attention to. Tournament leagues, you're going to be competing against a group of people, and if you rank highly enough, you'll advance to the following rounds. And then let's go Devontae. The thing about those tournaments is there's a big payout if you make it to the final round. It's really hard to make it to the final round. Sit and go leagues, you go all 17 weeks of the regular season. The strategy is a little bit different. You're just trying to beat the people you're playing against. You're not worried about other people playing in the tournament. It's just the 3 to 12, maybe 14 people that you're playing in the league with. That I see as like analogous to cash games, where it's more of a bankroll builder, whereas tournaments, like you're trying to win.
Also, I'm going to have you rewind a little bit because you kind of took the words out of my mouth, but I'm actually going to have you dive deeper into it. And I know there are shows where you describe this, but maybe just the elevator pitch. You just likened it to DFS, and you and I have had this discussion for the 3 years we've been doing shows together. Cash games and DFS you use as your bankroll builder, whereas I call the big tournaments your lottery ticket. You're hoping to strike it rich at some point. Break down for people what you mean by bankroll builder when it comes to these sit and goes.
Yeah, essentially, it depends. I tell people whenever you're playing best ball, you're playing DFS, you're doing any kind of sports betting, you need to set a budget and you need to set a goal. And we've talked about this a lot on the Summer School show. But if you're going to be playing and putting your money out there, you need to make sure that you're budgeting an amount of money that you feel comfortable losing, because you're probably going to lose a decent amount of money doing this. Like, the house always wins. It's just the way that it works. So you need to be prepared to do that. And you need to set a goal. Is your goal to have fun? Is your goal to break even? Is your goal to try and make money? Is your goal to get as many lottery tickets as possible and try and win $1 million? Whatever your goal is, that's going to set up the type of contest that you enter. And it's going to determine where you should be putting your sports betting budget. I have a goal of trying to at least break even, but ideally I want to make money over time. And so because of that, I will join a lot of small contests on Underdog, like 3-person contest, 6-person contest, and 12-person contest. Those are the sit and go drafts. They're easier to win because you have to beat less people in order to win those leagues. Sometimes I'll even do 2-person leagues, because then it's just a 50-50 head-to-head, just like your 50-50s in DFS tournaments. And because I feel like I can win those more often than I can win a tournament, because it's way easier to do, then it helps me be more aggressive when I enter a tournament, because I am not relying on that tournament to be my bankroll to help make money. I'm relying on other contests to do that. And B, it also, for me, it helps me reach my goal of trying to break even. Like, I've been pretty good at keeping a good balance and allowing myself to break even. And even if I'm not taking down a big tournament.
Yeah. And I think that lends itself to the very next question. Jamie, carrying the show. Do you have a different draft strategy for big tournaments versus single 12 team? And Austin, you even brought up 2-team. And I know there's a ton of, I think there's 3-team and 6-team. So let's just call it big versus small. And I don't necessarily mean the payout, because you can get into a $500 smaller tournament where you're just trying to double or triple your money. But when you are going against an enormous field, how do you approach that differently when you're going up against a much smaller field?
Yeah. So if you've played DFS, these I'm laughing at Kevin's comment, the Debbie Royale, and the chat about my running back. We'll talk about it later.
Yeah, that will definitely come up.
I definitely treat them a little bit differently, and in particular, did Brandon Ayuk already go? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
second round for Ayuk.
that kind of sucks. That we'll talk about that at some
People
point.
are catching on. I'm big on Ayuk. There's two names, Austin, as we start to get into redraft season that I'm going to want to talk a lot about that I don't think ADP has caught up with yet. And I don't mind mentioning them now. I don't think either one has went. I believe there is money to be made on James Cook and Jaden Reed. I am all the way in on Jaden Reed this season, and it feels eerily similar to how I felt about Christian Watson last year when Joel tricked me into loving Christian Watson. But whereas last year I was duped, this year I'm going in eyes wide open. And I feel like Jaden Reed is going to be able to stay healthier than Christian Watson did. And I also feel like Jordan Love has really formed a bond with Jaden Reed. I am really trying to delay this thing till it gets to your pick, but everybody is just taking their full 30 seconds. We actually got people timing out. James Cook is another one, Austin, that I feel like, and we'll talk more about him as the draft progresses here, but James Cook is another one where I feel like there's almost no competition. I was just touching up my Buffalo projections. There's almost no competition for James Cook in Buffalo, and he touched the ball a ton last year, and now without Stephon Diggs, I think we could see that go up again this year. I'm going to have you talk about players. That was just my stall tactics. Please get back to how you're approaching big versus little.
Yeah. So first off, in those small kind of 12-team leagues, I'm a lot more conservative. I'm trying to optimize the entire season because all 17 weeks matter. And so
Yeah.
I'm emphasizing players that I know are going to be on the field. In tournaments, I might take risk on players that I know are going to miss some time because that's a way to get unique. It's a way to get a more optimal lineup. The big thing with tournaments is I'm focused a lot more heavily on the schedule on weeks 15, 16, and 17 to figure out what teams are playing each other during those 3 weeks, because I need to go ahead and essentially build a tournament style entry for those three weeks. And when I say a tournament style entry, what I mean is I'm making sure I'm stacking players from the same team, and I'm correlating them with players from the team that they'll be playing during those weeks. And so in those tournaments, I'm being much more strategic about players I'm picking from specific teams based on their matchups. Whereas in the 12-team leagues, the sit and goes, I'm much more going off of player takes. Doesn't mean I'm not doing that in the tournaments, but there's a little bit more nuance in the player takes that I'll make when I'm looking at a tournament versus that sit and go draft.
And we're going to talk a lot more about week 17 correlation later, but I think the best way to put this is for the big tournament, you're focusing on the playoffs. For the little tournament, you're focusing on the entire season, I think is the easiest way to boil it down. So great question, Jamie. I'm so glad you asked that. Somehow that did not make it into my show sheet. So you perfectly filled some airtime there. We'll send you one of our $1 checks as soon as we get them. Austin, so you and I have talked about this because we did five of these last year. And it was around then that I started to realize that I just don't think this format works for our show. So one of the big differences we talked about with Underdog versus doing a mock draft on Sleeper is Sleeper's ADP. I don't want to say it's not accurate. Sometimes it's really bad. Right now it's fine for dynasty leagues, but there's not enough redraft going on for Sleeper to have accurate ADP right now. Whereas Underdog, you're competing against the Underdog ADP. So it makes a lot more sense. Other than just the ADP, and please feel free to delve into the ADP, what other big differences between drafting on Underdog versus doing a mock on Sleeper, which is maybe why you shouldn't be doing mocks on Sleeper?
Yeah. So first off, you're right. The ADP is different between the two websites. Although I will say it feels closer this year, just initially, than what it it did last year. Last year, the difference felt more stark. I think there's been a little bit more of coalescing on some common ADP. With, I will say, the exception of tight ends, like Sam Laporta on Underdog has a 3rd round ADP. Travis Kelce has 4th round ADP on Underdog. So, and that is definitely different than what's happening on Sleeper. It definitely means that you need to be drafting on Underdog occasionally. And this is also the value of doing those sit and go drafts, because you can do those little tournaments or those smaller tournaments that are smaller dollar amounts if you want to go that route. And that allows you to get a sense of like where players are going off the board. That doesn't mean it's going to be the same on a tournament, because on tournaments, people are going to reach more on ADP to build a certain type of team, to have a certain roster construction. But at least understanding where those players are ranked on Underdog is important to know going into that format. So I wouldn't do like your one best ball mania draft without having done another draft on Underdog.
Excellent point.
Like I would do something else before then, even if it's a puppy, even if it's like a $5 tournament, so that you see how people are drafting in tournaments on Underdog, like that's fine. But if you're trying to win Best Ball Mania, which is a very, very hard thing to win, to even advance in, then you need to have some more exposure to those ADPs on Underdog before going into it.
No, I think that's such an excellent point. And it's something we've talked about on Mock It Like It's Hot for a while now. Don't just mock with us on Sleeper, mock on the website where you'll be doing your draft, because you need to learn the interface. And Austin, one of the things I did talk about that I do think helps with the mock draft, because we never do it this way, is, and I always joke about this, you don't understand the pressure of a 30-second clock until you are on a 30-second clock. And you don't want your first draft to be when you're going for $1 million and it's your first experience with a 30-second clock, because it sneaks up on you when you're sitting there weighing, Brandon Ayuk versus Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk versus Kyron Williams in this draft. All of a sudden it becomes a nightmare where you start hearing the clock ticking down. And I told you I did my first ever best balls on DraftKings last year, and their noises scared the shit out of me as much as something in fantasy football can scare me, because I wasn't ready to get screamed at when it comes to that. So I will say one value of the mock is playing with a 30-second clock for the very first time, because it's not something that you experience very often, and it's something you need to be ready for. Just other than ADP and the obvious difference in draft strategy, is there anything else that sticks out to you about Underdog? One of the things I really like about Underdog is while you're drafting, it breaks down for you position groupings, which I'm going to ask you a question about later. Like, is there an ideal build when it comes to that? Underdog is built for best ball, and I think that just kind of shows through in their interface.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the other thing I would just flag is we're demonstrating a 30-second clock here, but you can do 8-hour.
Oh, that's right. There are long drafts over there. So
now that's nice. I almost exclusively do slow drafts. What you should know is that there are actually a limited number of slow drafts available for each contest. So they will run out, which is weird, because then like all of a sudden it's like I can only fast draft. So on Underdog, like let's say there's a contest and it's a 20 max entry contest where you can enter it 20 times. You may think like, oh, I can just spread out my slow drafts and get those 20 slow drafts over time. You might not be able to. You might have to do some fast drafts towards the end, because they do eventually run out of slow drafts. The other thing is, pay attention if you enter those slow drafts, particularly close to the season starting, because whenever you get to like a week before the season starts, those 8-hour clocks become 4-hour clocks, and then they become an hour-long clock, and then they become a 10-minute clock. And it has been hit or miss on me getting notifications to give me a heads up on that. So you should just, as the season gets closer, just be aware that those slow drafts are less slow.
Yeah, I tend to find I have a better time drafting Underdog from my computer. And so I'll be drafting from my computer, and then I'll get the notifications on my phone somewhere random in the middle of the 8th round where they're like, you're on the clock. And it's like, I'm 8 rounds into this draft. I've been on the clock. What are you talking about? I don't know. I prefer the interface. I don't know. I'm very weird when it comes to that. I just have better time with my computer. One of our listeners here has a question, Austin. It's not best ball related, but he is on the clock, or she. is on the clock. So I want to go ahead and get this question out there for him. And I asked if this is dynasty. So if you have not answered yet, answer. They grabbed Lamar in the first round of a super flex. They are now on the clock and choosing between Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, Puka Nacua, or Garrett Wilson. Where are you looking to go with this, Austin? My answer, I didn't see if they answered us yet. They did not. My answer is going to come down to whether or not this is dynasty. So, because for me, if it's redraft, I'm leaning the running backs. If it's dynasty, I'm certainly leaning the wide receivers, Austin.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think I might pick Jahmyr Gibbs either way. Honestly,
Ooh, okay.
I've like weirdly gotten high on Jahmyr Gibbs this year after being down on him last year. He really started to show that 3-down capability down the stretch. So particularly for redraft, I feel like he's a safe bet. I mean, like, it's also one of those things, like I always say, you can't go wrong with any of these guys, really. If I had to pick, I'm picking Jahmyr Gibbs. I took him in this draft at the end of the first round, so that can tell you a little bit of why. So trust your gut, but I'm a big fan of Gibbs in this situation.
So last year, Breece Hall led the league in PPR points for a running back and is equally as young as Gibbs. Why are you off on? Why is it so clearly Gibbs for you over Hall?
I don't trust the New York Jets.
Okay.
I don't feel like they really, I don't know. They didn't do anything to like wow me this offseason, like I felt like, yeah, they kind of worked to try and get some offensive line depth, but I'm worried that the offensive line isn't fixed in New York and that's going to be an issue for touchdowns. It also depends on the scoring system. So like if it's PPR, maybe I go Hall more in that situation because a bad offensive line can really help them out there. But if not, if it's half PPR, I feel like Gibbs has a chance for more touchdowns this year. It's just, there's a lot of variables here.
I also want to throw out a third variable for you, Unique. First of all, if Unique Football Shirts is a website, drop your link in the comments. People probably want Unique Football Shirts. Second of all, if this is super flex and we're talking second round, I'm going to throw out the next variable is that you should be looking quarterback over all of these guys.
That's also true. Like what quarterbacks are on the board.
Yeah, what quarterbacks are out there. But for me, if it's dynasty, I'm probably leaning the wide receivers. I'm probably leaning Puka Nacua. I adore him. Austin, I brought up the Breece Hall thing because I was working on my own rankings a little bit this morning, and I was trying to justify having Bijan Robinson over Breece Hall, and I kept him there. But I was like, Bijan Robinson's receiving upside, and then I forgot that Breece Hall had the best receiving totals for a running back last year. But does that likely change with Aaron Rodgers? So that is kind of what popped up for me there. Couple of more comments. Kevin, I don't know that I like you having all this free time because if you're just going to be here busting my balls the whole time, I'm an old man. Yeah, I like to draft from a computer. And if you let Joe Zolo tell it, I still use Mozilla Firefox. So we have a ton of fun just making fun of me just being a super old person. And Jamie, you got it, buddy. Your $1 is going to Fantasy Cares along with some other money. We're definitely going to get to that. And Jay, I'm going to get you back up on the screen later, but I wanted to point out I have a whole thing about week 7 correlation. So that's coming up. You'll be back on the screen here in a moment. But before we get into that, Austin, I want to still keep this with some of the basic questions. And the next question I want to ask you is about roster construction. One of the things I learned early on in best ball was there is a science, and some people believe it is a firm science on how many how many quarterbacks and tight ends you should have. And then it will even get down into the next complexion of your running back versus wide receiver build. There's no denying the meat of your lineup should be running backs and wide receivers. Do you see it as a loose science? Is it firm for you? How do you kind of break down roster construction and just try to like explain to people in layman's terms what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think so. First off, when it comes to quarterbacks and tight ends, best practice is 2 to 3 of each position, and it's some people would even say 2 to 3 of each and 5 total combined between the two positions. So if you're taking 2 tight ends, only take 3 quarterbacks, only take 2 tight ends. If you take 2 quarterbacks, take 3 tight ends. I'm a little bit less fuzzy on like the maximum being 5 between those two positions, but I do try and aim at that 2 to 3. What I will say, I've been running some numbers on this, so there is some backing to this. Now, it's hard to say because pretty much everybody's doing 2 to 3. So if you looked at the field of Best Ball Mania drafters last year, 56% of drafters had two quarterbacks in their lineup, 40% had three. So that's 96% of players had two or three quarterbacks. That's just the standard. That's what everybody's doing. What I will say about this that's interesting to me is that more people who advanced had three quarterback builds than the field. So just over 41% of rosters that advanced in Best Ball Mania had three quarterbacks compared to only 40% for the entire field, which that's not a huge difference, but this is a big contest. So those margins matter.
Yeah.
I also think that's a little bit based on the year we had last year where quarterbacks got hurt left and right. And so that may just be more about like last year was a weird year where there was so many quarterback injuries, and this year it could revert back to two. But 2 to 3 is very common for quarterbacks, and it depends a bit on where you take your first quarterback. So like if you're taking your first quarterback in the first 5 rounds, you probably should only take 2 because you're betting on that guy to be your stud. Whereas if you wait and start taking quarterbacks in say the 8th round, maybe then you need to take 3 quarterbacks. Similar thing with tight end. If you take a tight end in the first 5 rounds, you're kind of betting on them to be a stud. And so you need to really only go 2 tight ends, maybe 3. You can go 4 tight ends. It does happen. It's not happening a ton, but it does. There are some advantages to taking 4 tight ends.
Interesting. If you've never watched Maka Like a Top before, the draft kind of goes on in the background and then we try to find interesting picks. I'm actually going to talk about a few of the picks right now because I'm going to scroll the screen. So before I scroll, Austin, I want to take a look at the top half of this draft. And you already kind of touched on one of the questions I had for myself, which is when did the first tight end go? And so in this draft, it was Sam Laporta at the 2-8. I'm trying to look at the small screen right now. I think that's right, or 2-9 rather. And then Travis Kelce at the 2-10. And I paid attention. That was not an auto pick. That player went to auto pick after that. So I believe that was a decision. So my question to you, Austin, is twofold. Is the second round too early for these tight ends? And when we look at the order that these tight ends went, which is Laporta, Kelce, nobody in the 3rd round, and then back to you taking McBride, Kincaid, Andrews, Pitts. Do we feel comfortable with that being the order when these tight ends should go?
Yeah. So purely off of Underdog ADP right now, it's hard to say whether second round is too early, honestly. I do feel like I think Travis Kelce's a value right now. So I don't feel like late second is too early. I think you could have on Underdog, I think you can wait till the beginning of the 3rd round to do that. So for the drafter and 3rd spot here, ELH, like they could have feasibly started with Christian McCaffrey, DJ Moore, and then gotten Kelce.
Yeah.
Instead of taking Kelce ahead of Smith and Moore, which there could be some value. Like if you think DJ Moore or Devonta Smith are going to outperform Stephon Diggs, who's getting older, is in a new offense, no longer the only weapon on his team, right? There's clearly other weapons there that can compete for targets with him. Then you could have potentially waited on Travis Kelce. Similar thing, I think, particularly for Gator J, coming up with Mike Evans, who maybe won't have as good of a season without Dave Canales there this year. Could have potentially gotten Laporta as well in the 3rd round. That one's a little bit hazy. I get why people are taking Laporta over Travis Kelce right now because of the season he had last year. I think it's less clear cut to me that Laporta has to go ahead of Kelce every time because I'm like, I still am on the narrative that Kelce was hurt a lot of last year. I do know that Kansas City has been kind of framing up like, oh, we need him healthy for the playoffs. And so we want to make sure we deploy him then. So maybe that discounts him a little bit. But I think overall, like taking that tight end in those first couple of rounds, like it has to be what you're saying is this is the tight end. They have to be killing and out at the gate. And the other thing that I would say about this in terms of the stats, if you look at players who drafted and people who drafted in Best Ball Mania last year, about 9% of those players drafted their tight end in the first 2 rounds. When it came to players who advanced, only 6% advanced. having drafted, who
Interesting.
advanced drafted or tight end in the first 2 rounds. And I think the idea here, if you listen to the Fantasy Footballers DFS podcast, they talk a lot about opportunity cost.
I tried
I
so
think,
hard to get Matthew Betts on this episode. I just want to throw that out there. He and I had been talking about some other episodes. I tried to get his ass on here and we misconnected. So
if that had happened, I don't know that I would have been able to show up today. I would have fangirled a little bit too much. I love their content. They're really great.
You will be doing a show with him at some point this year. I'm willing to almost guarantee it. So.
Okay, that's good to know. I can mentally prepare myself.
Yeah, you can
now.
mentally prepare for it. Betts is a great guy, friend of mine.
Yeah.
My time at the Ballers. So.
Yeah, and their podcast is great. They've taught me a lot. They talk a lot about opportunity cost, and I think that's what's happening in those stats that I just gave out about picking a tight end that early. Also, like, y'all, just heads up, don't judge me about my draft right now. I'm not.
Yeah,
this draft is going to be.
We'll judge him at the end of the draft. All right, Austin, hold on one second. I'm going to go ahead and recap the first 3 rounds because I do want to scroll this thing a little bit. So I like to at least, this is the only recap I do. I want you guys to know who the early picks were. So you'll notice first 3 rounds, 1 quarterback. I love the color coding. 1 pink player, very different from every draft we've been doing so far this season. So you got CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Christian McCaffrey, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamar Chase, AJ Brown, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall. Puka Nacua might be the only kind of weird name for a first-round pick. I love it, but it's just so incredible to me that this guy went from an unknown rookie to a first-round pick. Jahmyr Gibbs, Garrett Wilson round out the first round. That flips over to Marvin Harrison, Devontae Adams, Jonathan Taylor, Kyron Williams, Brandon Ayuk, Saquon Barkley, Chris Olave, Drake London, the 2 tight ends we've been talking about, Laporta and Kelsey, Devonta Smith, DJ Moore finishing up the second round. And then we slide into the third round. Kevin starts us off with Devon Achane, Zay Flowers, Stephon Diggs. I feel like that might be high. That might need to come up later, but I also think that might have been an auto pick. Mike Evans, Nico Collins, Jalen Waddle, Josh Allen, Malik Neighbors, Travis Etienne, Michael Pittman, Deebo Samuel, and Derrick Henry. Father Time himself sneaks in to round out the first 3 rounds of this draft. Austin, are there any picks in these first 3 rounds that stand out to you? The major ones for me are that Puka is a first-round pick and Stephon Diggs is a third-round pick. That might have been an auto, but that's also a question about ADP. So those 2 stand out to me. I'm going to ask you more about those. But before that, do any of these stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, overall, this seems to be about how things are going on the best ball streets. I think even the running backs are going at a pretty similarly on Underdog right now in this first 3 rounds. What I will say is maybe not necessarily like specific picks, and this may have been an auto pick, but the roster build is the thing that I would point out that was as surprising as to see someone try 3 running backs in this as their first 3 picks. That's not really an optimal strategy on Underdog.
They were not an auto in the first round because the only auto in the first round was AJ Brown. So Bijan and Breece were the real picks. I did not pay attention after that. So
yeah. So I would just say, like, if you're doing Underdog, like 3 running backs out the gate, it's a very, very low optimal strategy. And also, like, keep in mind, you only start 2 running backs and then you have a flex position on top of that. But most people, I will say, like, they're taking a wide receiver in the first 2 or 3 rounds. Only 2% of players who advanced last year took running back the first 3 rounds. So it's not the optimal strategy to be taken.
First of all, I am loving this knowledge you're kicking today. This is better than any of the best ball shows we did last year. You've grown as a person, I've grown as a host, and you are just absolutely killing it. So that's good to know. Don't take 3 running backs unless you want a 1 in 50 chance of advancing in your league. That's not
in
good
the
odds
first
when
3
you're
rounds.
Yeah, but that's also not good when you're in the first 3 rounds. Certainly, draft 3 running backs. I don't think you're going to survive the season on 2 unless you fucking nail this thing. But draft 3 running backs, not in the first 3 rounds. But you don't want a 1 in 50 chance when you're in a 12-person league. That's not the kind of odds that you're looking for there. So I love that. I want to talk more about Stephon Diggs. I think Puka Nacua is a pleasant surprise. I'm happy to see him in the first round. I don't know how to handle Stephon Diggs, and I don't know how to handle the Houston wide receiver room right now, Austin. Nico Collins, Tank Dell. Tank Dell obviously coming off of an injury. Nico Collins coming off of the best year of his life. And then now you bring Stephon Diggs into the mix. This is all great news for CJ Stroud. But how is that going to work with these 3 wide receivers? Do any of them belong in the first 3 rounds? Because Collins went shortly after. If he wasn't, same round, so it was Diggs, and then 2 picks later was Nico Collins.
Yeah, I think I would say there's a lot of opportunity to be had here, because in these ambiguous situations, like there's a lot of upside that can be had for picking the right player. I do feel nervous about all, particularly Collins and Diggs ADP right now, because you're drafting them at a premium position, so you really need them to pay off. I might go for more of a sure thing, but I kind of prefer Collins over Diggs personally right now. So third round, you're at the place where they're not going high enough that it's like a wasted pick if things go awry. But it definitely is something that I'm like, I don't feel super comfortable drafting either one of them right now, because it's hard to know who's going to be the number one. So that can play to your advantage. It's probably something I'm not doing in like sit and go tournaments, because I want to pick players that I know are going to be the dominant target as often as possible in those tournaments for 17 weeks. In tournaments, then I'm more likely to take some shares of Stephon Diggs, some different shares of Nico Collins. And I think that gets into a point about like treating your ball drafts as a portfolio, where you're not just stuck on one player the whole time. Like if 100% of your lineups have Travis Kelce, my friend, you are setting yourself up for some serious heartbreak, because if he gets hurt, if he misses 5 weeks, all of your lineups are sunk for all of that time. Even if you have a decent backup tight end, like it's going to harm your team, all of your rosters very significantly. So I'm usually aiming to have like players be no more than on 30% of my rosters. Maybe I'll go a little bit if I have a very strong player take, but I'm checking my exposures throughout the draft season to make sure that I'm not just only drafting certain players and setting myself up for failure if they don't hit or they get hurt or something.
No, I think that's a great point. And it brings up another great tool that's available on Underdog that obviously isn't available on Sleeper, though. Honestly, I think it'd be cool for redraft leagues, where it tells you how much exposure you have to players. It's straight up a percentage of how many, and that can tell you if you've kind of overdrafted a player. For me, I use it that way, but I also use it for like, man, I was on this sleeper the whole year. I got him in 100% of my leagues because I kept getting him in the 18th round and shit like that. But yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. We had someone really smart on this show last year, maybe not one of the mock draft shows. It may have been one of other Club Fantasy shows, but they said in situations like this, ambiguous situations, take the cheapest guy. So does that lend itself to grabbing Tank Dell in this situation?
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I like taking the cheapest guy because there's the most upside there, right? If you're spending third round capital on Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, you're saying that they are hitting their ceiling, and they like that is the stance you are taking. Whereas a guy like Tank Dell, who in this round went in the 5th round, like that might be his floor, right? Like we saw him really pop last year, and you're taking the value there. So, and that's one key about Underdog. We alluded to, we're going to talk about like the ideal best ball quarterback. And I'll kind of spoil my answer a little bit, where it's a little bit about the value, the ADP value is finding someone lower in ADP who is going to outperform that ADP. That's one of the criteria for what can really be a game-changing player in best ball in general. We know this from fantasy drafts, but it's even more true in best ball leagues, where if you get a player in the 12th round that by week 5 is clearly should have been a top been taken in the first 3 to 5 rounds, in best ball, you can't do anything about it. You can't go pick that player up, right? In redraft, you get the luxury of spending your fab, getting your waiver wire priority, whatever, to get that player and fix that quote unquote mistake later. In best ball, you don't get that. And so if you took the lottery pick on a dart throw player and they end up popping, you're the only person that gets to benefit from that. And that's one of the big keys and big strategic points in best ball leagues.
No, I absolutely love that. It just makes a lot of sense, and opportunity cost I feel like is going to come up a lot when it just comes to best ball, and it just makes sense to look at it from that standpoint. That if you can be the one person who advantage or gains an advantage from something, it means a lot for you. You brought up quarterbacks, folks. I'm going to scroll the draft in a bit, but let's be clear: the top half of the draft is way more important than the bottom half of the draft. But Austin, you brought up quarterbacks, and quarterbacks were going to be my next question anyway. But I want to start with the top, and then we're just going to kind of naturally flow into the quarterbacks here. So Josh Allen goes in the third round. I don't remember if it was actually, I think that was the guy who was an auto pick right from the start. So Josh Allen was an auto pick, goes in the third round. But we saw some meaningful quarterbacks picks happen in the very next round. Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and then CJ Stroud. I'm going to basically ask you the exact same question I asked you about tight ends. Is this about when quarterbacks should be going, and how do we feel about these being the first guys off the board?
Yeah, so I do feel like where the quarterbacks are going right now is actually it's pretty good, and this is not too dissimilar from Underdog. I think something that's really shifted from last year. It feels like both tight ends and quarterbacks have moved down in ADP compared to where they were last year, which I think is good because it allows you to really hit those most important positions, really wide receivers. Like it's important to get that right off the gate. So I think this is a good spot for those quarterbacks to be going. I think in terms of the order, I guess I was the person to take the second quarterback. I think the first three feels right. After that, I'm probably skipping the Patrick Mahomes, CJ Stroud tier more often than not. And the reason for that is that they don't have as much rushing upside as the first three do. And that is a big deal to me when I'm looking at, I need to be taking running backs right now. Oh, well, that'll be an oops of the draft on my part.
I don't even know if there's going to be an oops. I barely have time. I'm trying to get these questions out. You are just killing the analysis. I barely have time to look at the draft right now. So there may not be an oops, but Austin just gave it to us. That and auto picking. No.
But yeah, I think that I'm a little bit, when you're taking Patrick Mahomes and CJ Stroud in the fourth, fifth round, you're saying that they're going to have dominant passing seasons, and they both have the potential to do that. But it is much harder to do that consistently and to predict that than a player like Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and Lamar Jackson having a ton of rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. And so I'm either getting kind of that elite dual threat quarterback early, or I'm waiting for a different quarterback later on.
I think that makes a ton of sense. And that kind of brings up, and you kind of said already, the best ball quarterback might be the best value late. But Austin, I wanted to get my keep trade cut into the game first. And there is a quarterback, and Kevin is not going to like this. There is a quarterback right now that I am seeing so much hype around that I am actively becoming a hater of this quarterback. And it is bothering me to no degree that I don't like Anthony Richardson. So Richardson goes in the fifth round of this draft. And I'm so happy he went ahead of the people I'm going to bring up. And actually, I'm going to change one of the questions. No, I'm not. I'm going to leave it. I'm shocked that Joe Burrow made it into this conversation. Anthony Richardson goes in the fifth round. Then you have a 15, 16 pick break before Dak Prescott goes off the board at 6-12. And then a 6 pick break before the young hotness Caleb Williams goes off the board at 7-4. So my keep trade cut for you, Austin, is Anthony Richardson is upside, Dak Prescott, the QB2 last year, who balled out, and Caleb Williams, who is coming into the league with one of the best wide receiver situations a quarterback could possibly have. How are you handling these guys in best ball?
In best ball. So let's be very specific. This is in best ball. Don't come at me on Twitter for what I'm about to say in a dynasty league. So the easy one for me is cut Caleb Williams. It's just, I would rather take some of the known commodities in this situation.
I guess we should also point out there's no trading in best ball, but that's not the point of the game.
Yeah, that's not the point of the game. I will trade Anthony Richardson because I think
because of the hype.
Of the hype, and I'll keep Dak Prescott for the point that you just raised. He's currently going as QB9 on Underdog. That's, and his ADP is 86.7. So some quick math. That's like what? How many times does 12 go into 84? That's 8 times. 7 times. 7 times.
Yep. So it's the
Seventh.
second pick of the
It's
seventh.
like seventh. Nice. Seventh round. That's pretty
Excuse
good.
me, second pick of the 8th round. Because
Yes.
7 rounds have already happened. So yeah.
8th round. So that's pretty good value to be getting on your first.
And about where he went here.
Yeah. So I love taking Dak Prescott there. He was the highest rostered player among teams that advanced last year. Like, he killed it. Now, he might have sunk your team in week 15. It happens. But he was really great for teams advancing last year, and it's a contract year for him. I don't see any reason why he would slow down. So I'll keep Dak Prescott in this best ball format.
I was going to give you a hard time about cutting Anthony Richardson, but cutting Caleb Williams, trading Anthony Richardson. But no, you give me the same answer that I actually would have given. The hype around Anthony Richardson. So let's focus on the question, because I have the same answer as you. I'm keeping Dak. The man balled out. It's not a surprise Kevin took him here being a Cowboys fan, but I think it played out. And so this actually sparked my next question, Austin. So I have best ball rankings. This would be a great time to mention that Austin and I's best ball rankings are live on Club Fantasy right now. If you go to the website, you'll see 2024 best ball rankings at the top. Austin and I are there. So I have the best ball rankings, and I've been trying to decide. We've talked about prototypical best ball wide receivers. Gabe Davis comes to mind. Guys who can have enormous games and then fall apart, but they're perfect for best ball. Is there a prototypical best ball quarterback? And I know you mentioned late, and that's probably where your answer is going to go, and that's fine. But are rushing quarterbacks more valuable in best ball? Should Richardson and his injury history concern me less or more in best ball? Because I'm terrified of Anthony Richardson right now.
Yeah. So the prototypical best ball quarterback, it kind of depends on the year, but there are some common themes. So I was looking at some advance rates from the past 2 years in Best Ball Mania, and I found some things that are very interesting. First off, Josh Allen is up there. Josh Allen is the most consistent quarterback in fantasy football. He has been QB1 year over year very consistently. So he's one of the prototypical quarterbacks on that front, best ball quarterbacks, because he's so consistent. You have to pay a lot to get him, and so that can be stressful, but he's pretty great. He's pretty solid in best ball. I would say the number 2 prototypical best ball player is a discounted dual threat quarterback.
Okay.
So to me, Kyler Murray is prime territory for this year. He is currently the QB8. He's going towards the end of the 7th round.
Okay, so you got
an underdog.
He went a little earlier in this draft than he would be an underdog. So
yes, which that 6-7 turn, maybe somebody reaches on him because they're on the end, which makes sense. But I think Kyler Murray is kind of the example of this year, the dual threat quarterback that can really, really jump their way up the board. And then the third type of quarterback I'm targeting is what I will call the boring quarterbacks. So you might be very surprised to find out that if we looked at advance rates for last year, some of the quarterbacks who were, well, first off, let's start here. The quarterback that was most likely to be in the final round was Jared Goff.
Ooh.
The next quarterback that was most likely to be in the final round was Dak Prescott. And then, wait for it, Brock Purdy.
I was going to say, if you mention boring quarterbacks and don't bring Brock Purdy into this.
And all of those quarterbacks, they were going pretty late in drafts. They were going in that kind of like round 8 to 10 range last year because they're boring, because people feel like they don't have upside, because they mostly do their damage through the air. But they're all teams that they have fairly high pass volume offenses, and they have really elite skill players that are helping lift their quarterbacks to more and more touchdowns, more and more yardage. So to boil down my answer, I'm shopping in 3 buckets for quarterbacks.
Yeah.
I'm shopping for the high-end dual threat quarterbacks that I know are going to be consistent. If I miss on those, I'm going to shop for a value dual threat quarterback or a value just solid, consistent pocket passer that runs the offense well.
No, I think that makes great sense, that you're not just looking, it's not like a boom or bust wide receiver situation. It's a if this, then this sort of thing. It's a clause on how you're looking for your quarterback. But it does sound like, and I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth here. Well, where is Anthony Richardson going in underdog ADP? That's the question I should have asked.
Yeah, he is QB6. ADP is 56. So that's what the fifth, sixth round.
Just in the middle of the fifth round, because you got 48 picks in the first 4. So middle of the fifth round. Does that qualify as early dual threat? Because I'm not touching him there, plain and simple.
Yeah, this is the dead zone that I am going to be avoiding more often than not. If he slips to the 6th round for some reason,
Okay,
that value feels better to me. But I think the thing about some of the dual threat quarterbacks, particularly Anthony Richardson, say Jalen Hurts, and Lamar Jackson, those 3 in particular, they have pretty consistent injury history. All 3 of them have been hurt multiple seasons. And so for those 3, I will be a little bit underweight on them, and I'll be making sure I'll often have 3 quarterbacks in those builds because I would be baking in some of that injury risk, which I didn't do here, but there's a reason for that. But if I have Josh Allen, I feel way more comfortable doing just 2 quarterbacks because Josh Allen, like, his health is wild. Now, players are hurt or don't get hurt until they do. So that could change this year. Josh Allen could get an injury, and then, we'll all call him injury prone after that one season. But I do kind of bake in some of the injury risk in my roster construction. But once you get past those kind of top 3, Allen, Hurts, and Jackson, I'm probably waiting out for a little bit.
All right, let's move on to the next concept. This show is going to run a little longer than I want, but there are 2 topics I have to give you time to talk about. I'll have you break down. Basically, we're going to do 3 things. You're going to talk about stacking, you're going to talk about week 7 correlation, and then you're going to recap your draft. There's so much more. We're certainly doing a second best ball show because this was amazing. But I do want to talk about stacking. It came up in the chat where Gator was asking about stacking different players, and we saw the guy who took Tank Dell, stacked him with CJ Stroud or vice versa, and inadvertently, I think the auto pick got the guy Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes. I know stacking is a thing that you kind of look for in DFS, and there's such a correlation between DFS and best ball. How important is stacking, and how deep do you go on your stacks when it comes to best ball?
Yeah. So first off, I'm going to show you how professional I am right now. If you want to hear me talk more about correlation, you can come join Masterclass on Tuesday night, where I'm going to be joining Gator, Jay, and Stacy Perez to talk more best ball. So there's that. I can be really quick on the stacking. If you don't stack, you won't make the final. Literally.
Okay.
There were 0 players that made the final in Best Ball Mania last year if they didn't have a stack. Nobody made it to the Best Ball Mania finals without a stack. So that's first off. Second off, most teams are double stacking and some are triple stacking. So that's 3 to 4 players from the same team. And more importantly, there is an advantage to getting 3 to 4 players in the team on the same team. Players that did that were more likely to advance, and they were more likely to make it to the finals than those that did not. We can get into some of the specific stats later on, but the short version is you need to be taking players from multiple teams, especially in tournaments. And the reason for that is you are making a statement that this team is going to pop off this year.
Yeah.
And it's not just exclusive to a player and their receiver. It's saying this team. You need to pick a team or pick a few teams and spread your exposure around and say these teams are going off. Last year, Houston Texans would have been a great team to target, right? Because CJ Stroud, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, their ADP was low. And if you said this team's going off this year, I believe in it, and you got those 3, you would have killed it all throughout the season. So you need to be, really picking players from the same team. When we're talking about the correlation, it's looking at those week 17 matchups, and it's a very similar concept. Teams that correlated more often made it to the semis and the finals. We're going to get into the weeds at some point on even correlating week 16 and week 15 so that you're setting your lineup up so that you can optimize each of those weeks to keep advancing. But the short version of this,
please dig into a little bit more about what you mean by correlation. So
yes, what I mean by correlation is, and I alluded to it earlier, if you pick a bunch of players from one team, you need to figure out you need to look at their matchup in weeks 15, 16, and 17 and pick players from their opponents so that your statement is, if my team goes off, the other team is going to have to keep up with them, and they're going to pass the ball a lot, they're going to score a lot, and this is going to be a back and forth matchup. And that's going to maximize my fantasy points for those weeks. So I'll spoil my favorite example right now, which is on week 17. I'm already very intrigued by the fact that Arizona and Los Angeles play each other. The Los Angeles Rams play each other in week 17. So I will probably have a lineup where I pick 2 or 3 Cardinals players and 2 or 3 Rams players. And then I will look at both of their schedules and figure out who are they playing in weeks 16 and 15 and pick some players from those other teams to maximize my opportunities in weeks 15 and 16.
So something where you're bringing in, Marvin Harrison Jr., Puka Nacua, trying to get Kyler Murray and Matthew Stafford as your 2 quarterbacks, because the hope is that these are already players you like, and then they are going to go into week 17 battling for a playoff spot, and we're going to see 60 points scored in that game.
Yeah, exactly. And the winner of Best Ball Mania for the past several years, they've had one of these situations going on where they have at least 4 players from the same team, 3 or 4 players from the same matchup in week 17. And it increases your odds of having that ceiling outcome and winning if you make it to the finals of a tournament.
So, Austin, obviously for you, who is a seasoned vet at this, you probably know a lot of these matchups. Is it something that, like, for someone like me who's not very good at this, but I enter a few tournaments, after I get my quarterback, should I immediately try to bring that schedule up for week 17 and see if that's another quarterback I like, or at the very least week 16 and see if that's another quarterback I like, and then make that my target? Like, how early should I have this as my idea going in? Because obviously I don't know who I'm going to get for my first 3 or 4 picks. So.
Yeah. So first off, I'm going to talk a little bit about stacking and what I mean by stacking more specifically based on what you just said. Stacking is not just picking a quarterback and a receiver with that quarterback or a running back with that quarterback. It's just, to me in best ball, it's just picking players from the same team. So that could be, I just pick 2 receivers from the same team. That's stacking.
Doesn't even have to be the quarterback.
It doesn't have the quarterback involved. So I will handle this a few different ways because I'm so in the weeds in it. After I go through and I assess all of the week 17 matchups, I will have my favorites in mind. And I will start, I will look at the ADPs that those players go at, and I will figure out, can I target those? And that's why you should check out my article that'll come out on this, because I will rank how stackable these matchups are based on where their ADP is. Sometimes it's easy to stack them, sometimes it's not. Last year, if you wanted the Cincinnati Kansas City stack, there was no way to correlate that because Travis Kelce was a first-round draft pick. Jamar Chase was a first-round draft pick. T. Higgins was like a second-round draft pick. Patrick Mahomes was like a second, third-round pick. Joe Burrow was way up there. It was just, there weren't enough picks to be able to get the actual correlation there. And so sometimes it's just about like how ADP can dictate which matchups you can stack more easily than others. If I don't come in with specific games in mind, I will let ADP start to define where I go. So in this matchup, in this draft, and this can actually get into me recapping my draft a bit.
I was gonna say, yeah, let's do that right now. So you're about to explain it. Let me go ahead and highlight your draft and do a little scrolling here. So as Kevin pointed out, you started off with the first round running back. What the hell is wrong with you? But go ahead and talk about your draft a little bit. So.
Yeah, we're going to talk about drafting running backs on Summer School. I have that as a schedule, but I did take Jahmyr Gibbs with the first overall, with my first pick at the 111. Detroit is playing San Francisco in week 17. So I then picked Deebo Samuel in the 3rd round. I don't really like Deebo Samuel. I would have rather had Brandon Ayuk there.
Yeah, you literally called it out by name. You said, has Brandon Ayuk been taken yet? So.
Yeah, so I took Deebo there, though, because I wanted to be able to talk through this concept. Yeah. And so took Deebo Samuel. And then later in the 10th round, I took Brock Purdy. So there I have 3 players from the same matchup in that week 17 game. So that if it pops off, all 3 of those players should be playing a decent role in making that game score be high scoring.
Yeah.
Similarly, Devonta Adams, he's playing for Las Vegas. Obviously, I think I failed to get a New Orleans player on the other side because of ADP. Oh wait, no, I got Kamara. I accidentally reached on Alvin Kamara. I didn't want to take my second run back in the 5th round.
I was gonna say, and by accidentally, he means specifically to make this correlation so he could talk about it for the draft.
Yeah, it was like I did it for the correlation, and then I was like, wait a minute, I don't want to take my second running back that high. To Jamie's question, I drafted this as a big tournament style. Did not draft this as if it were a 12-team sit and go. So that's why I focus so much on the schedule and those kind of correlations that are happening along the way. I did take Jalen Hurts because I decided I wanted a quarterback there. I don't know. It was kind of a panic pick, but I wanted the quarterback, and then I stacked him with Dallas Goedert. I wasn't able to get any Dallas players on the other side who they play in week 17.
I say Jay brings up some of the matches: Dallas, Philly, Detroit, San Fran, Ravens, Texans, and Browns, Bengals are ones that he's eyeballing.
Yes. I did get a lot of Las Vegas players. You'll see, like, this is my first draft since the schedule was released, and it was released like 3 days ago. So I don't have the schedule memorized yet. But as I was going through, I had ESPN pulled up so that I was looking through weeks 15, 16, and 17 and figuring out what players I might want to target, what teams I might want to target. I got Jacksonville in there because they play Las Vegas in week 16. And I have like 4 Las Vegas players by accident. So there's a little correlation there that can help me potentially advance into that final round. So, we have some progress to make on maximizing the schedule, but that's like how I'm starting to approach this as I'm looking at those 15, 16, week 17 schedules, those matchups, and building my lineup based on that.
Perfect. Let me go ahead and drop the draft off the screen there. Austin, thank you, buddy. I didn't know the show was going to run long, but I have no issue saying you're the best guest I've ever had. That was an amazing show. I need to give you more time to shine as the guest instead of the co-host. You killed it. I could not have imagined you were going to bring me that much knowledge in the middle of May for best ball season. My oops of the draft is if you idiots don't go back and rewatch this episode with pen and paper or a laptop or something and take some notes. Because I think my biggest takeaway, Austin, is I was wondering how the hell am I going to correlate week 17, but it's about going in knowing the matchups I want and then just building my lineup knowing those are the matchups I'm looking for. So amazing show, Austin. Obviously, you have a lot going on. You mentioned it numerous times during the show, but mention it one more again.
Yeah. So first off, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Austin_FFL, but really you need to watch us on Club Fantasy on YouTube, and you need to go to clubfantasyffl.com to get my content, because that's where I actually dive into this information more. And be on the lookout. We're going to have a second best ball show restarting soon. Summer school. It's going to focus on strategy. We're getting it in the works. I'm looking forward to it, and I'll be on masterclass with Stacy and Gator J on Tuesday night.
And speaking of masterclass, listen, Club Fantasy has 5 live shows every single week. We cover redraft, dynasty. Obviously, we cover best ball and mock drafts to help you get better at all of them. We even have a fantasy DFS golf show. There is no reason for you not to subscribe. 1,000 was not the goal. It was the first benchmark. Let's keep pushing these numbers up. Let's help us get some of these great people like Austin paid for their content. Hit the damn subscribe button. We appreciate you guys so much. Listen, we got a pretty nice week coming up on top of Austin doing the best ball show. You do not want to miss Dynasty After Party tomorrow. They're doing another mock draft. They're taking after us. They got a super flex mock coming up, and there might even be a very big Club Fantasy announcement on that show. There's no reason for you to miss that show tomorrow at 11 o'clock. We're going to be back mock drafting Monday night at 10 p.m. where Jay and Chris invite a good friend of mine, Jagger May, over from Football Guys. I think he said they're doing a startup mock, but that's going to be a great show on Monday night. Jagger May from Football Guys with Jay and Chris on Mocking Like the Stars. And then on Wednesday, our flagship show, no pun intended, we are starting our Look Inside series. This is for the summer. We are going to break down 3 teams every week and tell you our fantasy sleepers, the bust, the guys you want, the guys you want to avoid. It's going to be a great show. We're going to have Rum Boys Robbie on from Underdog, and we are covering his Washington Commanders along with Austin's Carolina Panthers, that he just loves when I say that, and the Arizona Cardinals. So Panthers, Commanders, Cardinals on Wednesday night on no pun intended at 7 p.m. Always remember, defense wins championships, offense wins fantasy football, and practice makes perfect. We will see you next week.